All right, excellent. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to our Literacy in the Discipline 612 webinar for April. We have a wonderful speaker here today, Catheryn Cofield from Chester Middle School in Chester, South Carolina. Ms. Cofield is a first-year teacher serving at Chester Middle School in Chester, South Carolina. She graduated from Anderson University in 2024 and her bachelor's and with a bachelor's in vocal music education and is currently serving as both a general music teacher and a choir director at her school. She believes musical literacy is a key component of any competent music program and one of the greatest tools that a developing reader can have. I would like to also say thank you very much to the South Carolina Middle Grades Initiative because their funding is what allows us to bring these webinars to you. We also have a very special thing today besides Ms. Cofield. We have a new feature within our webinars, and that is we are now able to generate for you a certificate for continuing units or continuing education units. So I'm going to drop that link into the chat. If you will take just a minute when you have an opportunity to fill this out, it will generate a certificate for you for the 1 hour of this webinar. And now you have credit in order to be able to take to your HR department. We're very proud of this because it has taken a lot of work for us to get this. So I'm very happy to share that with you, and that Ms. Cofield gets to be our premier kickoff for this particular feature. So, all right, without any more ado, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Cofield. Thank you very much.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen so you guys can see what I can see. Make sure that's working. We good?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So happy to be here. But before we get started, I would like to introduce myself a little bit. I already had that lovely introduction. But let me go into a bit more detail about my school and about what I teach specifically. So, as stated, my name is Catheryn Cofield. I teach choir at Chester Middle School in Chester, South Carolina. And if you don't know where that is perfectly okay because Chester is a small area. I have a kitten named Udon who you'll probably see running around. He just had surgery, so he is a little crazy. But yeah, let me talk a little bit about Chester. Chester is a Title IX, very low income, very high poverty, and high crime rate school district. We are pretty much out in the boonies, and it is really difficult to get those kids invested in literature, especially because so many of them fall very, very, very behind grade level. I teach about 4 or 5 kids who are functionally illiterate in my classroom. And of course, that's no fault of the students, but it's just kind of something they've been dealing with for probably the past couple of decades now. So this webinar, what I would like to go through and discuss is how we are using music to elevate our understanding of poetry. Because when I was in school, I hated poetry. It's probably not good to hear from your presenter who's talking about poetry, but when I was in middle school and in high school, I loved English class. I considered myself a great writer. I loved writing like stories and I loved reading, but I hated poetry. I hated it. There was nothing worse than the poetry unit where we'd all have to go around and read Shakespeare and talk about the deeper meaning or why the curtains were red instead of green or something like that, because none of it made sense to me. It was just a unit rather than an art form. And today I'd like to go through and talk about how music can be used to elevate that understanding of poetry, because I didn't understand poetry until I started studying music. Suddenly, when I became invested in an art form, I started noticing poetry as it actually is, which is an art form. So we are tackling this one idea. How can we elevate, or how can we use music to elevate that understanding of poetry? First, music reinforces vital concepts such as stressed syllables and poetic structure, and we're going to go over how the physical markings and makeup of music can reflect that change, or can reflect that in poetry. It can also demonstrate how a poem is broken up and divided while also maintaining that flow and rhythm that music has. Second, music helps the audience visualize the expression and imagery used by poets. A song can evoke really deep emotions that written words just kind of can't. And we're going to use Hunter T. Johnson's adaptation of Sonnet 18 to show how music can elevate those emotions and sort of almost manipulate the audience into feeling that deep connection that the poem is trying to get across by adding harmonies and textures and different rhythms and all that sort of thing. And then finally, music can showcase author intent and purpose and completely change the interpretation of a poem. We are going to look at two different adaptations of E. E. Cummings' I Thank You, God, for Most This Amazing, and show how one poem can have a vastly different impact on two different composers. But before we begin any of that, I'd like to play a small game with you. I'm a teacher. I have to introduce all of my concepts as games or else the students don't get into it. So just a quick game. This is a game called Rap or Poetry. This is simple. We are examining a few different lines from rap or poetry, and your job is to figure out if you can see which is which. My kids got super not frustrated, but it was difficult for them to decide the answers, so I'm intrigued how this group will do it. So first one, rap or poetry? And you don't have to answer out loud, it's perfectly fine. Rap or poetry? And so I learned to earn my currency, and over time affiliated, clearly clique of military minds. May God forgive us, though we dwell inside a paradox. Is this rap or poetry? Give you a second to think about it. So this is actually a rap song. This is from Military Minds by Tupac. Let's do another one. Is this rap or poetry? Gonna buy me a knife with a blade 10 inches long. Shall I carve myself or the man that done me wrong? Give you another second to think about it. This is about the time where my students realized that this wasn't going to be as easy as they thought it would be. Because this is a poem. This is a line from the poem Suicide by Langston Hughes.
Jennifer, you're rocking it.
Let's do another one.
Now that you've said that, I'm going to make mistakes with this, right?
You jinxed
You're
it
brave
now.
enough
You
to
can't do it now.
try.
Let's do another one. The soul that is escaping through the hole that is gaping. This world is mine for the taking. Make me king. This one is rap. This is from the song Lose Yourself by Eminem, which is one of his most famous songs. So if you've heard it, you probably already know this lyric. Let's do one more, and then I think I'll continue on. It is deadly, terrifying. It is the Inquisition, the revolution. It is beauty itself. Rap or poetry? This is poetry. This is a line from A Crowd at the Ball Game by poet William Carlos Williams, which I think is an amazing name. The whole poem is basically about the ferocity of a crowd at a ball game and how it is both very unifying and also terrifying, which I think is very fun. And then we'll do one last one, and then I'm going to move on. Rap or poetry? I wonder if they miss me. As long as I make history, now my soul is feeling empty. Tell the Reaper, come and get me. And this is, of course, rap. This is A$AP Rocky's Long Live A$AP, and my students were very happy when they actually got this one, because this isn't actually a artist they listen to. So, while I was doing this, though, my students had a very hard time, we basically did a Kahoot game where the students just had to answer rap or poetry. And I noticed almost every single time it was a 50-50 split between students who thought it was poetry, between students who thought it was rap. And one of my students got very upset about this because They don't like getting answers wrong. And they asked me, how was I supposed to know the answer? And that's a great question. When I played with them, they got really upset about that. But the thing is, they're totally right. Music and poetry are incredibly similar to each other. When comparing them side by side, it can be almost impossible to tell them apart. But these similarities aren't just between lyrics. Rap and poetry is a super easy comparison to draw, but that's because rap is basically a form of musical poetry. But when we actually compare the art form of music and the art form of poetry, there are a lot of really distinct similarities. In this webinar, we're comparing those two things and discussing how one can shape our understanding of the other. But in order to talk about that, we need to talk about the specific characteristics of each one. So first, let's talk about poetry characteristics. Poetry features the following characteristics: stanza and rhyming structure, expression through written word, evoking imagery, author intent and purpose, and it is meant to be performed. Now, what do I mean by all of this? Stanza and rhyming structure is probably a really big part, and I think this is the pitfall that most teachers fall into. A lot of teachers get kind of bogged down with the physical structure of poetry, about the stanzas, the meter, the rhyming scheme, all that stuff, which is all important. That's all super important. The issue is that that's not important to students. All of that stuff makes poetry what it is, but it's not important to the actual students who are learning the thing, right? So, one thing that I have to teach in music is I've got to teach the same sort of structures and everything. And we're going to go over that a little bit more. Kind of just spoiled some of my own thing, but it's okay. The other thing was expression through written word. That's the most important thing, I think. Poetry is a physical art form. It is meant to express something through written word. There's a saying I really like called "There's no such thing as a synonym." And what that means is that every word carries a unique significance, even if the differences are kind of subtle. For instance, if consider the difference between angry and furious. They both technically mean the same things, but which one has more of a punch? I'm angry or I'm furious? Those two things kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. This expression is something poets have to deal with. They have to figure out what goes into the poem, which also leads us into talking about evoking imagery and author intent and purpose. That evoking imagery can be used to really sort of drive home those expressions. The more imagery you use, the more detailed and life-bringing your poem becomes. And what you choose to focus on, what you choose to ignore, that is all a part of the author's intent and purpose. And then the last one I talked about, the meant to be performed element. I've had some people disagree with me and say poetry's not meant to be performed. You're not supposed to it's not like other art forms. Like you're not supposed to perform it. But I disagree. And the reason I disagree is because in my high school poetry class, we would do that thing where we would go around and one person would read a line, and then the next person would read a line, and then the next person would read a line, and it sucked. It was terrible because no one was actually performing the poetry. They were just reading it. When you listen to like an open mic night or someone actually talking about the poetry and using the right inflections, it changes the piece. It makes it more deep. It makes it more distinguished, right? So that performance element is really important, I think. These characteristics are vital parts of poetry, and I'd like you to keep in mind as we move into music characteristics. Music features the following characteristics: careful rhythmic structure, expression through sound, evoking imagery, composer intent and purpose, and it is also meant to be performed. I sort of hinted at this earlier, but music has a very careful structure, There's a reason that students will spend 4 or 5 semesters just studying the structure of music, not even just performing it, just understanding the structure. Rhythmic structure gives music its pulse and helps with guiding the listener through that experience. And you've experienced this if you've ever been in an audience and a song was playing and someone attempted to like clap along to the song and they were off beat. The whole thing is ruined, right? So you understand just how important even a basic understanding of rhythm becomes. Next, music is expression through sound. We talked a lot just a second ago about how poetry is expression through words. Music is expression through sound. Musicians don't have the luxury of giving you a physical uh, example of their expression. They can't just tell you, hey, this piece sounds like this because of this. You have to physically hear it. Music communicates this emotion through melody and harmony. It's not enough to use words. Music has to make abstract sound connect with listeners on a deep emotional level. This also leads us straight into evoking imagery. Composers have to use sound to convey an entire world or scene to its audience. There's a reason that in every movie you've ever watched, there's a soundtrack behind it. That's because composers have to express that imagery and that expression to you, the audience, to boost the dialogue, to boost the scenes and the acting that's happening. All of these things are representative of the last two things, which are composer intent and the idea that it's meant to be performed. Music is not meant to sit in a box, it is meant to be performed in front of everybody. That's why in my class we spend about 4 months just learning music to perform for one concert. It is the most important thing to music, is that final performance. And what we choose to go into the performance is also really important. Now, let's compare and contrast these two ideas. We talked about the poetry characteristics and the music characteristics. Now let's combine them together. When you combine these two lists, it becomes a bit obvious. These two art forms are extremely alike. From the writing process to the deeper meanings of each phrase, music and poetry contain these nearly identical schools of thought and creation. Rather than simply stating how alike they are, though, I want to analyze each of these elements in details and explore some of the intricate nuances of these things. Firstly, let's go over structure and form. Like I said earlier, both poetry and music feature these really structured forms of writing. We each go through these sort of like, in college, we all go through some sort of literacy, or not literacy, English class, one or two of them. And then in music, you have these dense theory classes that last for semester upon semester, and they are incredibly boring if you aren't interested in music. But the best poems and music pieces have these deep analyses on the written structure and form. One of the very few things musicians learn is how to read rhythm and properly play them. And poetry is similar in that way. I said earlier that a big teacher pitfall is focusing too much on the structure because you lose the rest of it. So let's take a look on how music kind of simplifies this process. This is from Shakespeare's Sonnet 18. This is one of Shakespeare's most famous sonnets, so I'm not going to analyze it too far, and it's been analyzed to death, but I think it's still a really good tool when examining structure and poetry, because sonnets are basically built to demonstrate meter and structure and how each thing works. They're very specific in that way. So let me go ahead and read this poem, just in case internet's kind of funky. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Now, that was beautiful, right? Excellent. Shakespeare has this really great way of writing these words in a way that just flows off the tongue. Now let's just see what happens when we attempt to change a few words. I've only changed a few words here. I've crossed out the ones I've changed and bolded the different words. And let's see how that affects the flow of the piece. Shall I compare thee to a spring day? Thou art more beautiful and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the flowering buds of May, and summer is too short a date. Suddenly the poem doesn't exactly sound as cohesive. It doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well. And the new words don't match the flow of the poem. It's harder to recite, and in my case, the last line becomes almost impossible to say in one go. That's because the poem doesn't follow any of that strict meter it set out. Sonnet 18 has this very strict iambic pentameter, meaning that every stressed syllable is in every other word. So, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? I've highlighted all of those stressed syllables, and by changing one of those words, the whole thing is thrown off. By changing summer to June, we lose some of that momentum because we're cutting off a syllable. By changing lovely to beautiful, we add a syllable, and the whole thing's thrown off. Here's a challenge for you, and you can do this alone. But try to read the poem and stress the opposite syllables. So stress all of the unbolded ones and see what it does to the poem. It's a bit weird, right? My old choir teacher used to make a joke calling this the emphasis on the wrong syllable. And he thought that was very funny. Um, and what's happening is that the whole thing is kind of thrown off. Now, how do we use music to understand these concepts better? Let's try and use musical rhythm to demonstrate the difference between stressed and unstressed syllables. Here's the thing about rhythm, right? Writing musical rhythm is tough. You have to put exactly what you can into one bar of music in a way that makes the most sense to your piece. And this is tough because there's like 1,000 rules and you have to decide what you focus on, how much fits into the music, what needs to be removed, what is the more important beat. And this can be really difficult to discern with a piece, but for our intents and purposes, Shakespeare makes it super easy. Shakespeare has a very dynamic or very unique pattern to it. This poem has a very clear walking motion to it. Each word is only 1 or 2 syllables long, except for temperate, and the poem has this clear pace that creates this upbeat and downbeat motion. So, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? It's really simple like that. The notes I've put above the poem represent that each syllable takes up about half the beat. If you were to put a tempo to it, each thing would only take up about half a beat. However, something is off here. And that's because the rhythm is boring if we leave it as it is. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? It's boring. Luckily, musicians have a trick for this. It's called the stressed beat, and we'll represent that using an accent mark. So that little arrow above the notes kind of looks like a less than symbol. I always get them confused. But in elementary music, you call that the crocodile. But that little arrow above the notes is called an accent mark. This tells the musician that the note they're currently playing needs more stress or emphasis compared to the other notes. So let's check it with the accent marks. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? It's different. This is this is much closer to the intended reading of the poem. By adding these accent marks in, we can see the stresses of the words. Now, poems do have a way of doing this, and I've linked them kind of down here to showcase them. These are called, I believe, this is called the scansion method. And the scansion method, in my opinion, has a bit of an issue. It's a bit harder to distinguish, in my opinion. And that's because the symbols are so different from each other. This U is so different from the stress syllable. To striving readers, it can be a bit difficult to tell what each thing means. It's just adding another layer to it. So, and not to mention, these symbols are not unified. In my research, I've encountered just as many U's and underlines as I've seen X's and slashes or a slanted line instead of an underline. It's not, across teachers, from what I've seen, it's not exactly unified. So this can be a little more confusing when going from like English 101 to like English 102 or English 1 to English 2. Music, however, has to be unified. You can't just like create a different form of music and say like, oh, this is easier to teach it. It has to be unified. And with this specific example, with the accent mark, the important notes are only the ones marked. So these ones are the only things with something different above them, making them stand out a bit more to the untrained eye. By using the language of music theory, we can see that these exact same structure concepts can be expanded on, and they can be verbally distinguished, and they can distinguish these accent patterns. And that can be kind of lost with the scansion method. Adding rhythmic notation also allows us to have a visual breakdown of those concepts, which helps several of my striving readers because it's really difficult to grasp the nuances of iambic pentameter if you're struggling to read the words on the page. Music is a language that's built on symbols and iconography, and that can translate a little bit better to people who struggle to read the rest of the words, like iambic pentameter, which is a big word. So now let's move on to expression and imagery. How do we put emotion into sound? How does this help us enhance poetry? This is my favorite part of each art form. It's the part where artists have the most creative freedom. Each piece of art is created with the intention to express something to its audience. Like, art's entire purpose is to turn an abstract emotion into a physical object, whether this is like a book, a painting, or even poems and music. Poetry's goal is to express an emotion or scene through written words. Poets must find ways of describing what the audience is supposed to feel in a way that doesn't feel like awkward or out of place. Music, on the other hand, has to rely on sound to get those messages across. Instead of written words, it relies on those distinct melodies and harmonies to create emotions and scenes for its audience. So we have to answer the question, how do you put an emotion into sound? Let's take another look at Sonnet 18. This is the full poem. I believe I got this screenshot from poemanalysis.com. Really great site. And let's take a look at it. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair some time declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of thou fair outst, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou groust. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and gives life to thee. It's beautiful, right? Shakespeare really kind of hams it up here. He's talking about comparing the joy of summer to his love, talking about everything from the length of the day to the warm winds that blow past to even the brightness of the sun, which he thinks is too hot sometimes, in his opinion, which I think is just kind of funny to include. From lines 1 through 8, he makes so many comparisons to the beauty of summer. However, in line 9, he shifts. Suddenly, summer isn't his focus anymore. His love is. The beauty of summer is no longer comparable to his love. Unlike the woefully short summer, the beauty of his lover is eternal. His lover will never truly lose that which makes them incredible to him. These are all super intense expressions. It is really an intense emotion to be like, I would love you forever because you're beautiful forever, unlike the sun. Shakespeare is really deliberate here because he's answering the very first question by line 2. Can I compare thee to a summer's day? Absolutely not, because they're more perfect than one day can describe. This floweriness of his language and imagery kind of really pushes that expression onto the audience about how much he loves and adores whoever he's speaking to. And this turn at line 9 really pushes that idea of eternal love and adoration. As long as men can see, or men can breathe and eyes can see, that language is showing just how devoted the speaker is to his muse. So here's the question, right? This is all really good language, but how do you elevate that language? How do you get that language to someone who doesn't quite understand Shakespearean, or even better, doesn't really understand the point? And that's easy. You add music. Earlier, we did that exercise of adding rhythm to the poem to show the specific weight of each syllable. While this is great, and it shows the structure of rhythm and the natural speaking pattern. It's not pretty to listen to, right? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? It's boring. It doesn't. It tells us how to speak the poem, but and it tells us the structure, but it doesn't tell us anything else. How do we take this and make it interesting for our audience? How do we use music to elevate it? And it's simple. You change the rhythm. Composer Hunter T. Johnson thought the same thing, so he changed the rhythm. While he keeps most of the weak syllables on upbeats, he makes significant changes to a few. Compare and lovely are deemed as some of the most important words of these two lines, so they're given more time to bloom through longer notes. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Another thing Johnson does to sort of add intrigue to this piece and also remind us that this is, in fact, a poem, he puts a rest between every line of the piece, meaning that no music can play here. This is sort of to give the audience the like a both a visual and an auditory cue that there's a break here. The line stops here. Now, whoops, hang on. There we go. Rhythm isn't enough. Take a look at the notes themselves. The notes themselves go up and down, and most importantly, the big important notes kind of form the apex of the line. Johnson is doing this really deliberately. The more important the note is, he's going to make sure that the music builds up to it. So they're higher, not only a little bit higher than the rest of the notes, but like I said, the whole piece literally climbs up to these big impacts. Those markings, so these big, like hairpin, crocodile, whatever you call them, markings up there, those are telling the musicians to get louder and softer. So, because compare and lovely are the most important parts of the piece, or at least of this line, we are literally building up to them. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? This imagery also kind of peeks its head here. By giving this piece sort of a rising and falling motion, it's actually emulating gusts of wind that slowly build up and fade back down, just like the warm winds Shakespeare himself describes in the next lines. However, unfortunately, this is still kind of boring. One kind of pretty line of music really doesn't give the idea that eternal beauty and bliss is what their lover is. That's not, this one line of music really doesn't add to that. So, what more can we do? And it's quite simple. Obviously, you just add more lines of music. Johnson wants to give the audience the same ideas of love and romance that Shakespeare does, so he uses more voices and complex melodies and harmonies. The more voices you add and the more harmony you have, the more layered and dense your piece becomes. This kind of texture can help the audience to hear the complexities of that love. It's not a simple thing, so it shouldn't sound like it. There's really specific things happening here. Each of these parts start at different times to sort of build up to that really intricate moment. All of these notes build into really big and beautiful chords. And unfortunately, I'm not a 4-part choir. So I'd like to take some time to actually listen to the piece and see how Johnson uses music to express those intense emotions. And let's hope this works, because if it doesn't, I'll cry. But can you all hear that?
No, we're not. When you share your screen,
Oh no.
well, here's what you need to do. So what you can do is stop sharing screen, and then when you share again, there's a button that says, I think, optimize for sound, and that may help you.
Okay, let's try it.
So
Let's try that.
try clicking on share and then go to share screen. And I think there's a little like radio button at the bottom left that says optimize for sound.
Share audio, share a screen or tab. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. Give me just a second here, folks. Perfect. All right. I think we got back to it. There we go. Can you hear it now? So I hope you all could hear that. If not, I'm so sorry. Great. Okay. One of the really cool things about that is that all of these things really build into each other. Hunter T. Johnson is an incredible composer. I highly recommend checking out his work. But from what we can hear is we can just hear the pleasantness that Sonnet 18 expresses to us. The music gives it this texture and bite because there's more for the audience to analyze and listen to. Music is kind of manipulative in that way. Whenever you see like a horror film, you have these like rising strings and really crunchy chords. Whenever you see a really sad film, suddenly like piano is playing and it's really slow and dramatic. And that's because music can help drive these emotions sometimes better than the acting or just spoken words can. I always try to tell my choir students that it's not enough to just sing the poetic lines. You have to embody the emotion that they are creating. You can't just sing this incredible language of Sonnet 18 as a boring lecture. It has to have emotion and depth added into it for it to truly make an impact on the audience. And this way of thinking has kind of really helped them absorb the deeper meanings behind poems and treat them as an art piece rather than just lyrics on a page. And that's because they can physically hear the depth of those lyrics, which helps them understand and relate to them a bit more, which I really like. Now, let's see. Did this change over or? Good. Okay, great. So now let's talk about. Sorry. There we go. Now let's talk about one last element that both of these art forms share, and this is author intent. Why did the composer write this? Why not write something else? Arthur? Sorry. Author intent is one of the most important parts of any kind of art. As a consumer of art, you have to read between the lines. What is the true purpose behind this piece? And that is the whole point of both literacy and music literacy. You have to understand the deeper emotions into it. Let's see how both poetry and music tackle these sort of issues. For this example, we're going away from Shakespeare and going a bit more abstract with the incredible I Thank You God for Most This Amazing, which is a very interesting piece by E.E. Cummings. Let me go ahead and read it for you if I can get this thing to work. Great. I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees, and a blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today, and this is the sun's birthday. This is the birthday of life and of love and wings, and of the gay, great happening illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, any lifted from the know of all nothing, human, merely being, doubt unimaginable you? Now the ears of my ears are awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are open. let's take a second to let that all just digest that, because it's a weird poem. It's like every single time you read this poem, something new kind of pops out at you, and that's on purpose. This is a weird poem, but it's also ethereal. It's written as this prayer, thanking God for everything, as vast as that everything may be. Yet there's also some strangeness to this poem. There's a lot of unnatural capitalization, and even the title itself seems to just cut off. Like it just cuts off. I thank you, God, for most of this amazing. Cut. Not to mention the language is almost manic in a way. There's no periods. The words almost seem to run into each other. Lines 4 through 8 and 13 through 14 are also all in parentheses, implying that this is separate from the rest of the poem. You've also got these random dashes within the third stanza that imply that that line is separate from the rest of it. And the only capital letter in the entire piece is God. There's so much to dissect here. Why is it written like this? And that's because the composer has really specific intentions. Some read this poem and think that this is the beginnings of a spiritual awakening, and that the speaker has truly seen the depths of God's creation, and it's leading them to kind of this manic episode where they're excited and reeling from the glory of it all. So the poem comes across as fast paced and excited and running into each other, because when you're so excited, you just can't even stop talking about the thing, and it doesn't even matter what you're saying because you're just talking so fast. That's sort of the vibe it's getting towards, right? But others read this poem and have a different takeaway. They have the idea that this is representative of how truly indescribable God is. The speaker, as a mortal, cannot truly describe or thank God for his grace or power because it's too vast to explain. So, all we, the audience or the speaker, can offer is this flawed and yet so humble of a prayer. Those are the two sort of interpretations. And while there's a lot of them, it's on purpose that you get these different kind of things from this poem. The author's intent here is tricky to discern because it's written in such an abstract way. Whether it's to show glory or a manic episode is something that's left within the audience. So, a lot of different things we can get from this. Let's stick with the two interpretations I gave for now as we dive into the music side of this poem. Here's a question. This poem is weird, right? It's got a lot of weird things going on. How would someone tackle putting music to this? As we said, there are a lot of different ways to go about this, but the two pieces I've chosen to represent this, I think they sort of represent the dichotomy of this poem. One of these pieces is by Eric Whitacre, and the other is by Lloyd Faust. Now, Eric's piece, which we're about to listen to, is beautiful. He interprets this piece as a reverent prayer to God, so that the music reflects that. There are these beautiful harmonies and dense, beautiful, long stretches of choir. All of the chords kind of crunch together into these really layered and complex harmonies. And this is sort of to mimic the beauty and expansiveness of God's kingdom. He also accidentally fixes the title of the piece by adding an extra day to the end, which, as we described, is not actually what's happening. And I hope we can get to it, but there's this beautiful part in the middle where singers alternate some chords on the word infinite to create this ethereal echo sound, giving the imagery that there's literally echoes of God's creation throughout the world. Let's take a listen to it. So that's Eric Whitacre's version of this song. And as you can hear, it is beautiful. It is a beautiful piece. There are so many things happening with it. And Eric really takes his time dissecting the piece and showing off these glory, like this glorified beauty. Like, it's just a lot, right? Now let's take it in a completely different direction. We've got Eric with this beautiful piece here. Now let's see where LiD goes with it. LiD Fausch, on the other hand, chooses to embrace the chaos of the poem. He aims to showcase all of the weirder elements within the music. So what he does is he uses these strange pauses, and the choir is almost completely in unison except for certain parts. And the whole piece is here to showcase how abstract the original poem is. Let's take a listen. Again, same tone. So that's LiD Fausch's work. And as you can hear, so incredibly different from Eric Whitacre. We listened to about the same length of time. We listened to about 2 minutes of Eric Whitacre and about 2 minutes of LiD Fausch. And LiD, he speeds through the music. He is trying to emulate that manicness that is kind of in the original poem. It's rambling. It is so fast. And to musicians, it's actually kind of unnatural to play because it's in such a weird rhythm that it's not natural for musicians to play it, which sort of reflects the unnaturalness of the way the poem is written. The only thing that is remotely close to a normal sounding choir is at the very end, where suddenly Faust is trying to express the tranquility and peace that the speaker has found by the end of the poem. But Faust does something really interesting. Just like the poem itself, Faust denies us a satisfying ending. The chord he uses at the very end of the piece is not harmonically stable. This is so, in order to not go into like an entire music, whatever speech, chords are built up of notes that sound great together and notes that don't sound great together. This is a chord that is built up of unstable notes that kind of clash with each other. And the brain hates this. The brain hates when chords don't match with each other. The brain craves harmonically stable chords, so the denial of it here is incredibly deliberate. The intent here is to show that even with this big, beautiful finish, the oddness and the sort of alienness of the poem still remains with the audience. So both of those pieces feature the same poetry, but the way the composers go about it and go about representing it is a perfect showcase of how composer intent can shape a piece. It also showcases exactly what I've been arguing through this entire presentation. music can be used to elevate our understanding of poetry. Let's summarize a bit of what we've done and talk about how our understanding of music has shaped our poetic analysis. First, music reinforces those vital concepts such as stressed syllables and poetic structure. We went over how the physical markings of makeup of music can reflect that of poetry. It helps demonstrate how a poem is broken up and divided while also maintaining the flow and rhythm. Second, music aids the visualization and the expression and imagery that poets can craft. A song can evoke those deep emotions and really deepen our understanding and connection to the written word. We use Hunter T. Johnson's adaptation of Sonnet 18 to show that music can elevate those emotions and express what the poetry wants us to feel by adding these dense harmonies and textures to it. Finally, we talked about how different composer and author intent can be. The way a piece is performed can completely transform our understanding of the interpretation. Whitaker and Faust read the same poem and had these vastly different interpretations, and they used the music to showcase those conflicting emotions and those deep, big understandings of the poem. In essence, the interplay of music and poetry opens this world of depth and resonance that enriches this literary experience. We can use music as a tool to help give our understanding of a poem depth or help aspiring readers to find deeper meaning within it. I hope that this webinar showcased a bunch of the nuances of poetry and how it plays with music, so that the next time you have a poem or decide to do a unit on it, or even just are curious about something, try searching for a musical adaptation of it. It can be instrumental, it can be choral, it can be classical, whatever you want, but try and find a musical adaptation of it and see how the music heightens the experience, how the music changes certain aspects. It might just surprise you what you're going to come up with and what you're going to find. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to have given this presentation, and I hope you all enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cofield. We really appreciate it. We have just a couple of minutes left. Is there anybody who would like to have, who has questions or would like to say something with Ms. Cofield?
I just wanted to make a comment that I can see how this way of presenting poetry would work great as like what I call the pre-reading part in the reading process, because it just like students respond to music. You know, you can play something and they're going to do this, or they're going to respond to it musically and then say, didn't quite understand all those words. And so then when you present it like just as a text, they may engage with it better than they would have if you just said, here, let's read Shakespeare.
I think so. I completely agree, because I was one of those students. I was one of the students who had to read Shakespeare and all these poems, and I didn't understand any of it until I started studying other forms of art, because poetry was never given to me as an art form. It was given to me as a unit to study.
Mm-hmm.
So by expressing it as an art form, it can kind of make those brain connections.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to have done it.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate your sharing these really cool ideas with us. I wanted to just go ahead and let everybody know that the link in order to provide feedback on the webinar is listed in the chat. So if you could grab that and just take a minute in order to give us some feedback, we would appreciate it. Once again, any other questions, comments for Ms. Cofield? All right, well, thank you for celebrating National Poetry Month with us, and we look forward to hearing any other suggestions that you might have for us for blogs, webinars. Don't forget that our website is literacy6-12.org. If there's anything that you're looking for, hopefully we'll have it on there for you. Thank you so much for attending. We really appreciate you all, and thank you again, Ms. Cofield, for presenting. Have a good evening.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.